Shaykh from the Tariqa students.
And also, you know, you mentioned, I think you answered it in part, but it was about Shaykh Murabit mentioning about respect of parents and dedication to parents, etc., and balancing responsibilities of your religious life and your home life and etc. But for example, as we all know, there's certain teachers you're attached to, and even if you're not in a formal relationship of pledging allegiance, etc., even within the Mahdara system, you might have some students who just become very attached to a certain teacher. So would it be that, for example, Ibn Ashir is your first encounter with studying Tasawwuf? You would study some lines with one teacher, some lines with another teacher? Would they have a problem from you going to different teachers, or etc.? Or, you know, is there any comments regarding that?
Within the Mahdara or outside of the Mahdara?
Within and outside. So, for example, Ibn Ashir.
A very good question. I mean, I personally, whatever I studied with all of the main teachers within the Mahdara. Murabit al-Hajj, Murabit Haddameen, Murabit's grandson, Sheikh Abdullah, Murabit's son, Sheikh Tahir, one of the person who spent the most time with Murabit al-Hajj as a student. He spent there 40 years. Now he's going on, I think, 45 years or so. Actually, when I got there, he was there for 30 years. So now he's close to 50 years in the Mahdara of Murabit al-Hajj, and I would study with him as well. And so in one sense, they would not have an issue because the goal is the pursuit of knowledge. And in the earlier days of the Mahdara, there were so many students around Murabit al-Hajj that some of the junior teachers, they had to take on some of that teaching load. So he didn't have an issue, so to say, with that. What they did have an issue with is just where people start Mahdara hopping or Sheikh hopping, really just because it breaks up that continuity of learning. So it was more of a learning, you know, their upsetness, and I've had some of the shuyukh there be upset when, you know, when there's these breaks in learning, but it's not because we're leaving their suhbah or their companionship, but because we're breaking up the learning. But, and I can't speak on their feelings, but everybody at the end of the day is a human being. And I mean, you have students, I have students. When you see students that maybe you've spent a lot of time with and now they go with somebody else, yeah, it's kind of like a parent where, you know, I'm sure this happens with when parents, they invest so much in their kids, and then they go off and they take a sheikh, and now that child has more love and respect and honoring, at least outwardly, than with the parents. You have to think that's going to affect the parents. And one of the things that I found in the discussion of some of the Sufis is that there's this discussion of who has a greater right on you, your sheikh of tarbiyah or your parents. And then they approach it, and I've even seen some of the shuyukh of sharia, ulama of sharia, try to give it a ta'wil. But for me, and I've never seen this written before, for me, I would have to say that khilaf should not exist, especially in, or specifically in the case of where a person's parents were Muslim. Because what is the greatest lesson that you can get? Tasawwuf or not tasawwuf, madhab or not tasawwuf, what is the greatest lesson that you can get out of this dunya? What is the greatest point of ilm? Anybody on the chat? Let's ask and see if people are listening on the chat. What is the number one most important lesson? Okay, somebody says adab. Anybody else? Akhlaq. Keep going. Let's get the chat going. What is the number one lesson? Iman. Thank you. And Iman is just that basic, like, faith, right? The Shahadatain. Who taught the majority of Muslims their faith? Who taught the majority of Muslims? Salih, who gave you the Shahadatain?
Parents.
For me, my parents too. So it's like, okay, if the greatest thing that you can get, we know that this is the Shahadatain and we got it from our parents, then even if a sheikh gets us all these connections to the ghaib and the unseen and perfects our character and so on and so forth, does it really compare to the Shahadatain? So your primary sheikh, and this is what I tell a lot of my students, your primary sheikh of tarbiyah is your parents. Look at your parents now. Look at them. If your parents just dropped you off at an orphanage and didn't give you anything, then you could say, okay, I have a biological connection, but they didn't give me any deen. But if they gave you iman, and if they gave you the majority of your akhlaq, which again are solidified between the ages of 3 and 5, the shuyukh are just like my wife, her teachers, when she was thanking them, they said, no, we just did the icing on the cake. Your parents did the majority of work. So I used to think, and unfortunately I didn't come to this realization until my father was on his deathbed, but I thought the majority of my development came from my shuyukh. But the reality is the majority of your development comes from deen development, akhlaq development, adab development. Everything comes from your parents. And then the shuyukh just kind of finish the icing on the cake. But unfortunately, they get all the credit and they get to steal the glory of, oh, who refined my character.